Okay, all right. So now let's go ahead and move to we're gonna start with chapter 9 today. We're gonna start with political parties. So before we start on our discussion on political parties, are y'all familiar with political parties? Like what I'm sure you all know the political parties that we have in America, right? Like the two major ones. I'm sure you're familiar with those two, right? I mean, Republicans and Democrats, right? We all, even non-political science enthusiasts or people who have not taken government 2305 know who the two major political parties are because they're always in the news. But what we're going to talk about here within this chapter is, of course, we're going to break down, the similar, the differences between the Democrats and the Republicans. We've talked a little bit about that when we talked about political ideology and we were comparing liberals and conservatives. So there usually is that correlation between Republicans being conservative and Democrats being liberal. Although it hasn't always been like that because we are, in this chapter we're going to talk about political realignments and how, back when the Democrats were founded, back during the time of the Andrew Jackson administration, that the Democrats were actually the conservatives and the Republicans formed in the 1850s. Right before the Civil War, they were formed in response to what was going on with the slavery question that was gripping the nation back, well, I mean, it had been gripping the nation before, but it got to a boiling point, so much so that we had the Civil War, that was fought over the question of slavery, right, as one of the major reasons. So the point I'm trying to make is that the parties have realigned to where now the Republicans tend to be the conservatives and the Democrats tend to be the more liberals. But we're also going to take a look at the purpose of political parties, why we have them, what they do, um, not just, at a grassroots level, but also their importance within government as well, right? We're going to talk a little bit about how political parties dominate, the government landscape when it comes to Congress, right? That the that the power within Congress is based on which party has the majority, right? We talked a little bit about how at the beginning of this year we had the House of Representatives changed in terms of being it changed from Democrat to Republican, right? Where the Republicans now have the majority, right? And so the reason why we had that change was because now in this recent midterm election, we had more Republicans that we have more Republicans in the House than Democrats, right? So Republicans now took control of the House, and so that's important, right? We need to talk about how the political parties also are important when it comes to who's in control of government, right? So that's just a brief overview in terms of what we're going to take a look at. So let me go ahead and share the screen here, and then we'll get started here. Okay, let's see. So let me get this going. Let's see, share application, entire screen. Okay, all right. Okay, so you should, let me shut that phone here. So you should be able to see chapter 9, which deals with political parties here, right? So let's go ahead and get started here with political parties. All right, so first, of course, we're going to define what a political party is. So a political party is an organized group that attempts to influence government by electing its members to important government offices, all right? So political parties are an interesting group because as we've talked a little bit before that one of the major um, one of the major strategies that Americans use, and not just Americans, but politically minded people all over the world, is to gather in groups. Right? You've probably heard the phrase "strength in numbers," right? This is a very popular idea, right? And it goes also back even previously, even before like political ambitions or political discussions. Even if we just go back to like the beginnings of human civilization, right? You probably heard the phraseology that humans are social creatures and we like to band together in groups, and of course we had to do that for our survival, right? Because we stood a better chance of being able to survive as a species together and pulling our resources as opposed to just being out there by ourselves. So this whole notion of belonging to a group and feeling that being a part of a group uh, makes you more powerful as well as makes the group more powerful and allows for you to get more things accomplished in an easier way is the basis for people banding into groups in the first place. And so a political party is a good example of this, right? It's a group that directly tries to influence government, right? Now, there's other groups that also do this as well, right? We'll talk about interest groups later and how they try to influence government, but their work is a little bit more behind the scenes, these interest groups. Whereas with political parties, their goal is much more forward because their main objective is to get their members elected to government, right? It's to actually get their members in government to actually be making those decisions. Let me share a quick story. I was talking to a friend of mine a couple of years ago, very brilliant guy. He just got his doctorate in New York, and he's been debating what to do, like, you know, because he's very politically active like me. So he's been debating about, you know, does he want to run for something? Does he want to be a policy analyst? Does he want to? And I was explaining to him, dude, like, just go run. Because if you're a policy analyst and you go before Congress and you give all this testimony and you're citing all your sources and all your research, there's nothing that makes those committee members. There's nothing that guarantees that the committee members are going to agree with what you're saying. They could listen to all that you're saying, and then after the committee hearing's over, they'll be like, yeah, well, we're going to vote against it. So why be the middle person, and why not you be the person that has the power? Why not you be the person that actually, you know, can make those decisions? And so, you know, he agreed with that. So I don't know if he's going to do that, but I'm just saying that was my advice to him was, you know, go and be the, you know, the person with the power to decide, you know. So that the reason why I share that is because that's an example of how political parties are really important, right? Because they are the ones who actually get their members in to public office, and they're the ones who actually make, you know, have the power, right? Now, the founders did not envision the rise of parties. In fact, they were very much against it. George Washington, in his farewell address, discussed this. He did not want to see political factions begin to form. However, it's not surprising that the political factions would ultimately form, because if we go back to chapter 2, remember we talked about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, right? So there was already a political division within the founders themselves. So it wasn't surprising that eventually the founders would, you know, splinter off into these two groups, right? So, and of course, George Washington was talking about, you know, that when you have political parties, that creates division, and, you know, that could be a threat, you know, to unity and things like that, especially because of the infancy of the country, right? But at the same time, again, it's not surprising that, you know, that ultimately we would have, you know, these two political camps, so to speak, you know, like, you know, liberals and conservatives. Identification with or support of a particular party or cause is known as partisanship, right? So, you know, partisanship I like to compare it to, like, you know, being a fan of a sports team, right? So, which is short for fanatic, right? So if you're a fan, you keep up with your team, you follow the team, you watch the games, you keep up with what's going on, like the moves that they're making, like especially like if they're in the off season, and you feel a sense of identity, right? That's why, like, people will say things like, "Oh, well, you know, we lost last night," or, you know, if we get this player, we'll be better. I mean, obviously, of course, they're not a member of the team, right? That's why I hate when people are like, "Oh, I didn't know you were, like, you played for them." Like, dude, like, no, that's not what it means. It's a sociological attachment to the team, right? So that's why people, as you can tell, I'm not a big fan of snarky, sarcastic people. So so with that being said, you know, that's a good comparison for, you know, for people who identify with a political party, right? Now, of course, that's a little bit different because with a team, the most you can do is probably go to games, right? You can't necessarily, like, influence what the team is going to do. But on the politics side, you know, for political parties, you actually can be members of political parties. You can actually not just vote for them, but you can actually go to, like, you know, state and national conventions, you know, like I've done. You know, I've been a full-fledged member of, you know, of one of these parties, right? And I've gone, you know, because I used to be a precinct chair, so I've gone to these local, state, and national conventions, been a delegate for a major presidential candidate, right? So you can become a full-fledged member of a political party depending on how active you want to be, right? But that's what partisanship is, right? We identify with a political party here. Now, the roles and purpose here of political parties, right? So parties help mobilize citizens to vote, inform the public about government policies, and ensure that the public voice is heard in policy debates. They also seek to gain political power by nominating candidates, electing them to public office, and winning elections, right? So this is, in a nutshell, the purpose and why we have political parties, right? So let's kind of break this down a little bit. Okay, so if you look at all these different responsibilities, right? So of course, mobilizing citizens to vote, of course, is the top priority, right? Because like we talked about in the last chapter, yes, being politically active and going to rallies and protests and all that stuff is important. But if it doesn't result in your candidate or your party getting more votes than the other side, then it, you haven't accomplished the ultimate goal, right? Which is for you to gain political power within wherever you're running, whether it's Congress or anything lower than that. Um, so you have to you have to get you have to turn out your supporters to go and vote for you, right? But they also inform the public about government policies, right? And it's not just during election time, although that's when you see a lot of this, right? But political parties are also supposed to be informing the public, and again, and I wish the parties would do a little bit better job on this because of the fact that it's hard to get that information out there. People aren't really informed, like we talked about in chapter one. So I understand that the parties have a tough task to do this, right? But they do need to try to get the information out to the public and try to let the public know what the party stands for and what they're working on, right? And ensure that the public voice is heard in policy debates, right? Because again, the parties do have to listen to what the public is saying. Because if you've got political parties that aren't getting public support, then they're not going to last very long, right? Because the people are the ones who decide which party they're going to vote for in these elections, right? So they definitely do have to get the public on their side, and they do have to try to get the public involved in these discussions, right? So and ultimately this correlates, or this culminates with, the nomination of candidates and getting them elected and winning elections, right? Which we'll break that down a little bit more, right? Now, due to the nature of political parties, political scientist Schatzsnyder argued for a political system run by what are called responsible parties. He believed that parties motivate more people to participate compared to interest groups. In order to win elections, parties also broaden the range of issues publicly considered. So the idea of responsible parties is the ideal way that political parties should operate, right? You should be able to expand your base to include as many people as possible, have a variety of different issues that are being discussed, have disagreements, have differences of opinion, and being able to talk those out and have those discussions, and ultimately empower people to get more involved in their government, right? Now, again, that's ideally, right? Because unfortunately, this might not always be the case when it comes to the way political parties actually operate. And as someone who's been a party insider, I can definitely vouch for this, right? That there are areas that I wish the major political parties would improve on when it comes to accessibility, when it comes to the way they set up rules, and because another thing you also have to remember, everyone, is that political parties are private organizations. This is actually kind of a it's not necessarily a misnomer, but a lot of people don't take the time to actually kind of put that together, right? They're like, okay, so this is a private group that is running for public office. So what that means is that the group themselves, in terms of the rules that they have, that is all handled privately, and then they get together and they run for something public. So that's kind of interesting, right? Kind of that's kind of interesting in terms of, and that was an argument that was used for many many years, like especially with the Democrats when they had what was called the white primary. We talked about that a little bit. So their main argument for keeping the white primary was, well, yeah, we're a private group. If we want to just have white people, then that's all right because we are a private organization. But of course, you also have to remember that yes, it's a private organization, but it's involved in a public system, right? So they can't have it both ways. They can't necessarily just claim that they're all private all the time, right? But it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the criticisms, right? So some people argue that the two major parties are subsidized by big business and the wealthy. They say that this results in unequal democracy in which the interests of the lower class are largely ignored. And yes, so this definitely is a popular topic when it comes to both of the major political parties, right? There's criticisms for, because it's not just the Republicans that get criticized for being the party of big business, right? Democrats have also been accused of that as well, especially when it comes to some of the more progressive wing of the Democrat Party. Some people like Bernie Sanders, AOC, the Squad. They've been vocal about, and you can read this up online. It's everywhere. That you can see that they've been vocal about how some of these Democrats have been in terms of like they've been criticized for accepting super PAC campaign contributions from corporate donors and things like that. They've been very big on that because they feel that that's not that shouldn't be reflective of what the Democrat Party should stand for, right? Now, again, that's just their opinion, right? There's different opinions on this, but I wanted to give you all an example of how this is something that both political parties, in terms of criticism, is something that both political parties are going through, right? And then other people also argue that the two parties are too divided along liberal and conservative lines, known as party polarization. Party polarization is something that we definitely will talk about a little bit more in the chapter. It is very important, especially in more recent times. Parties and elites, they say, are more polarized compared to the majority of Americans. So yes, and there is research that backs this up, that the political parties are becoming more polarized. What this means is that the Republicans are becoming more conservative and the Democrats are becoming more liberal, right? So they're moving away from the middle, so to speak, right? They're digging into their very strong ideologies, right? And so when you have that move away from the middle, it's harder to compromise because you've got two groups that are diametrically opposed to each other, right? So if you are diametrically opposed, it's going to be hard to be able to find some common ground. And the other argument, of course, is that most Americans aren't like this, right? That most Americans are. Oh, there's different arguments to this. So, some people say that most Americans tend to be moderate. Another argument is that because most Americans aren't really involved in the political process, they don't really keep up with the ins and outs of it. It's kind of complicated to keep up with, like we talked about before in this class. So a lot of Americans might just have apathy for politics in general. So they might not necessarily be as they might not necessarily be as passionate about it, one side or another, because they're just not really passionate about it in general, right? So what this does is that the few people who do keep up are the very passionate ones, because it's hard to. What I'm trying to say is that, and I know I've seen this for myself, is that it's hard not to get passionate about this stuff the more you learn about it. Does that kind of make sense? That the more you get exposed to this, the more you learn about it, the more passionate you're going to be about this type of stuff. So if you just have a bunch of passionate people, then it's going to create a situation where it's going to be hard. If you got passionate people on one side and passionate people on the other, it's going to be hard to kind of to be able to really come up with a compromise. Does that kind of make sense in terms of what I'm saying, or not really? Do you all kind of see what I'm saying, or is that, or am I just totally wrong on this? I mean, what do y'all think? I mean, is that something? Does that kind of make sense, or not really? I want to see what you all think about my observation here. That's something that kind of makes sense, or let's see. Um, Let me go with, okay, so Edla says yes, Hazel says makes sense. Okay, yeah, makes sense. Okay, sounds good. Okay, just wanted to just kind of see if that was yeah, because that's definitely something that I've definitely seen as well here. Okay, so let's continue here. So how do parties form? So parties form in one of two ways. Okay, so we have the first way that parties form is political conflicts prompt officials and competing factions within government to mobilize popular support, right? And this is the way political parties first formed, right? Like we mentioned, right? The first national parties, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, were formed this way, right? Because this is where you had that schism amongst the framers, right? Where you had the Federalists who were very much in favor of stronger central government, and then you had the Anti-Federalists that were more in favor of state and local government, right? So two fundamentally different views in terms of how the United States should be set up, and those views are, I don't want to necessarily say they're incompatible, but they are very different, right? So because of these differences, you had a situation where the two camps splintered off and formed their own, differing political parties here, right? So that's how we first got political parties in the United States. course, we're also going to talk about the two-party system and how that's been the dominant system here. Parties also form when a group of politicians outside government organizes popular support to win governmental power. Okay, sorry about the. It's because I have the email open because I just want to make sure like I don't miss any emails because we get a ton of emails and sometimes I miss them because sometimes we get like it's not junk email but it's just email that doesn't really pertain to me and so sometimes I get like a student response that kind of you know so I have it open because I want to make sure okay I got some emails while I was teaching here. Okay, but the second one is talking about how that let me again. So parties also form when a group of politicians outside government organizes popular support to win governmental power, right? So this happened during the 1850s. A group of state, civic, and community leaders opposed to slavery built what was to become the Republican Party. So, right, the Republicans, a lot of the former Republicans were former Whigs, because originally the two parties that were competing against each other in the 1840s were the Whigs and the Democrats. But the Whigs broke up because there was disagreement on how to handle the slavery issue. And so ultimately, out of the ashes of the Whig Party, formed the Republican Party, right? So, because again, there was growing opposition to slavery, because as we talked about in what chapter was it? Yeah, it was chapter 4, right? No, it was chapter 5 in civil rights. We talked about how the historical reason for why the Civil War issue, the slavery issue accelerated in the 1850s was because of all the new land that the United States had acquired during the Mexican-American War. And the question was, okay, so is California going to be a slave? So that was why that's pretty much what precipitated brought the slavery issue to its boiling point, so to speak, right? So the Republicans were formed out of this this continuing tension. And of course, obviously, the rest is history, as we know. So since the 1850s, we've had those two major political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. Okay, so let's continue. The American two-party system, election rules. Okay, so we will talk a little bit about third parties later on, but the main reason why we do have third parties, but we don't they don't get anywhere near the attention or the support that the two major parties do. I mean, 2016, Gary Johnson, he got 1% of the total vote as a Libertarian candidate. Just 1% of the entire vote was for the Libertarian candidate. And we talked about the Libertarians, right? They've got a lot of interesting ideas, right? They certainly could be a legitimate different option for people, right? But some of y'all might think, well, why is it? Why is it that the Libertarians just don't get the support that the other two? Well, the way elections are set up has a big way to do with this, right? Because there are rules in terms of the way elections are set up, and we're going to talk about this more so also in the next chapter, right? So U.S. election rules contribute to this two-party system. The United States has what's called a winner-take-all election system, and also has single-member districts, right? So we talked a little bit before about this, in terms of how that in a lot of these elections, they're considered winner take all, and we also see this within the Electoral College, right? We'll talk about the Electoral College in the next chapter, how that system is set up to where the presidential candidate that gets a majority of the votes in a state gets all of the electoral votes, right? So if you don't win the state, you don't get anything, right? So that contributes to why that's one of the main reasons as to why there's only two major parties that really have a chance, nowadays, right? So in each geographic district, the candidate with the most votes of plurality wins an office, first past the post, right? Now, Texas also is a little bit different in that Texas also has what's called the runoff system, where in state like the local elections, if you're gonna win office, you do have to get a majority. As well as so any election in Texas, other than the president, you do have to get a majority, right? But again, these systems are different in different parts of the country, right? So remember that the election laws are created at the state level, right? Because remember, it's not mentioned in the Constitution, so elections belong to the states, right? So the states are the ones, or I take that back, it is mentioned, but my point is that it's mentioned specifically as belonging as a state responsibility. So the states are the ones who ultimately set up the election rules. So that's why Texas is going to look different than other states, right? Let me see. read this morning about no labels. Oh yes, yes, and there's a lot of different interesting third parties. Like one of my favorite third parties was La Raza Unida party over in Crystal City, Carrizo Springs, that started in the night in the 60s and 70s. Right, they actually won some school board races out there in Southwest Texas. But yes, there's all kinds of other different third parties, but unfortunately, like we're talking about here, they're not able to get the support because the system doesn't allow it, right? And this is different from proportional representation, in which seats in government are allocated based on the percentage of the vote received by a political party. And we see this more so in other countries, like especially like in Europe. Let me go back to the chat here really quickly. Strategizing for 20. Well, that's good. They definitely need to. Or wait, you're talking about wait. Oh, no labels. Okay, so they're strategizing for. Um, okay, so I'll look them up in terms of who they are. I have not heard of them, but I definitely will look them up here in terms of I don't know, are they a new party? I guess, but yeah, and especially nowadays. Nowadays, there's a big because if you look at some polling information, you'll see that Americans are very dissatisfied with the two-party system, right? That there is a desire for a different, for different viewpoints, right? There is a desire for a different, different groups of people to get involved in government, right? So the desire is there, but because of the way the system is set up, that is what keeps the two-party system in place here, right? And like I was saying, the proportional representation, you see that more in Europe, where the seats of parliament or whatever governing body is out there is determined based on in terms of the total number of votes, right? So let's say you've got let's say you've got 10 political parties, and so let's say like 50% of the vote is for one party, so they'll get 50% of the seats, and then it goes down from there, then another 20%, another 5, another 10, and ultimately, so that's the way that the seats are determined based on a proportional representation instead of having all of these single member districts. It's done more of a on a nationwide level here. Now, plurality voting rules creates a two-party dominant system. Divergey's law holds that plurality rule within single member districts will result in a two-party system because voters fear wasting their vote, right? Because since you only have two viable parties, people are not going to. They're going to feel like they're going to have to go with the lesser two evils, so to speak, right? Like I know a lot of people in 2016 were not pleased with either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, but they had to make their choice, right? Because again, Gary Johnson, as we saw, wasn't really going to be much of a logistical option, so to speak, right? But some people still felt that it was important for them to still support third parties, and I'm not saying that I don't support third parties. Jill Stein, 2016, she was the Green Party candidate. She certainly, was more reflective of my views as compared to Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton being a little bit more on the moderate side. But I mean, I just didn't feel like I could vote for, Dr. Stein because the support is just not there, right? At least in terms of the way that the system is set up, so to speak, right? So again, and it's something we can definitely still talk about because some people are like, well, yeah, with that attitude, it's going to stay, two-party dominant. Yes, I definitely agree with that as well. It's just going to take some time. It's going to take time, it's gonna take a lot of effort. There's a reason why we haven't had successful third party candidates. I mean, Ross Perot was I guess you could say rather successful in the early 90s. But that was a lifetime ago when it comes to politics now. Like politics has changed so much even in just in the last 30 years that it would be very difficult to I mean, if Trump ran third party, I mean, that's something, because you definitely also have to have the support, right? You have to have the support in the community. So, I don't know. It's an interesting topic that we can definitely talk about a little bit more. So, okay, so we're almost coming up here to the end. We'll try to do as much as we can, and then we'll do more on Wednesday. So, parties are important to democracy. So, political scientist John Aldrich argued that parties solve three fundamental problems of democracy. The three questions, of course, are how to regulate the number of people seeking public office, how to mobilize voters, and how to achieve and maintain the majorities needed to accomplish legislative goals. And we're gonna break down all three of these here, right? So when it comes to this first one, right, the regulating the number of people, this goes to the recruiting of candidates. one of the most important party activities is the recruitment of candidates to run for office, right? So the political parties are always on the lookout, looking for um, good people within society that they feel would be able to to be good candidates, right? And there are certain characteristics that you need in order to be a successful candidate, right? Um, Party leaders look for candidates with experience holding public office, the ability to raise large amounts of money, and the ability to withstand severe scrutiny, right? So these are kind of the three main these are the three main categories that a lot of these political parties look for. Now that of course this isn't always the case, right? If we look at Trump, right, he kind of meets two of these three requirements, right? Because he didn't hold public office before. In fact, he used that as a positive, right? He was using that as a good thing, right? Saying that, hey, I'm not part of the establishment, right? And that definitely resonated with a lot of people, right? Obviously, of course, able to raise a large amounts of money, because of his persona and his celebrity status and the ability to withstand severe scrutiny. Obviously, of course, we'll see how that goes because we hadn't had a chance to talk about, right? You all heard about last week, right? How the what's going on with the New York grand jury and all that. So, but before that, he had been able to definitely withstand, severe scrutiny with a lot of the scandals and the reports that have been coming out and things like that. So we'll see how this news, plays out, so to speak. Um, but again, this isn't always the case. But the first one, this is also why you tend to see a lot of candidates will have previous political experience, right? Um, like a good example would be like members of Congress. They usually started off like in the state legislature and then they moved up, right? So they started off as a state rep or a state senator, and then they moved up to Congress, right? To serve in Congress there, right? So you see that a lot of these politicians tend to have previous political experience. Barriers to recruiting candidates include extreme high cost of political campaigns. This is probably this is definitely a big issue. The extent, the cost of the campaigns, the amount of time required for fundraising. I've talked to several of my friends who have run for public office. Again, one of my good friends, she ran for Congress out in the Laredo area, and she talked about how the thing that took the most time was calling for people to donate to her campaign. And she said she didn't like it, right? And I wouldn't like it either. I don't think a lot of us would like asking people for money, right? But it's something that has to be done because the nature of these campaigns is that campaigns are funded by private money. So we don't have publicly funded elections like in other countries. Instead, these are done by private donations, right? So if you're going to run for something, you have to be able to raise money from your private supporters, right? And then we also have the gerrymandered legislative districts, which again we'll talk a little bit more in terms of what gerrymandering is and how the districts are set up in a way to where it provides an advantage for one political party over another or one incumbent over another, things like that. Okay, so let's see. We'll start on nomination. We'll start on this next time because this is going to lead us to the primary process, and we'll talk about that a bit next time. So yeah, so we'll stop here at party nomination. So okay, all right. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and end here for today. So does anyone have any other questions or comments about what we talked about, either before or anything else that you all have questions about? Okay, Diane, I know you're stopping by. There was a previous video that I recorded talks a little bit about like due dates, so definitely I recommend for you to watch that one. Basically, it's just talking about extension on due dates. So, but yeah, so okay. So does anyone have any other questions before we end for today? Is there anything that I can help y'all with before we end for today and before we close out? Does anybody have any other questions or is it? Oh, that's fine, Diana. I understand. I understand that you're working, so I'm just grateful that you can show up when you can. So, um, but okay, all right, sounds good, everyone. Okay, if there's nothing else, then let's go ahead and end for today. You all be safe, take care, and we'll see you all on Wednesday. Okay, so please let me know if you have any questions. Okay, and good luck to you all on the quiz that's due this week. Okay, for last week. Okay, so be safe, and we'll see you all on Wednesday. Thank you all so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.